Hello everyone, welcome back to Parkitect. Welcome to the penultimate episode of campaign mode. And in today's episode we're going to be doing sheer cliffs, the second from last campaign map. These ancient cliffs were once a popular tourist destination but now lie dormant, work some amusement park charm into small space and bring back the crowds. So the goals really are just to have 500 guests in the park. Everything else is optional, so on paper this one should be quite easy. So let's get into it. Okay, so here we are in the map. Looks like you can't charge for entrance fee in this one, which we don't tend to do anyway, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And there we go, we've already completed a goal with no loan debts. I'd imagine that we do need to take out a loan at some point though, when we're building this park. Once we get to 200 guests we unlock a coaster and £8,000. So yeah, everything seems to be in our favour, but we've got a very interesting map for this one, based on one of the Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 scenarios I believe, which I kind of remember playing before. I feel like it might have been in the added attractions pack or something like that. But yeah, we've got a big cliff face here that we've got to work with and a small amount of land at the top, and we could also work with the land on the beach and unlock a bit further if we want to. Really though, I want the sort of most of the park to be around this cliff area because I think it's a really interesting sort of feature for us to work with. So let's see what we've got in terms of rides. Just the observation tower in calm rides, a couple of thrill rides, top spin and twister, rubbish coasters, only got junior and wild mouse. So we're going to do a bit of research on coasters I think to start things off. No transport and a log flume. Scenery wise, quite limited, just generic medieval and steampunk stuff. And shops and stalls, we've only got the vending machine, so we're probably going to have to research them as well at some point. So that might be the challenge really, that we've got a really limited amount available to us at the start of the scenario. So let's get into it anyway and see what. Welcome into the first time lapse at the start of the build. After a little bit of sort of umming and ahhing, I decided to go with a construction site type theme for this. I thought it was something different, something that I've not particularly seen in the campaign mode before, and I thought it's something that we could work with quite easily with very basic pieces and the selection of rides that we've got. So we're starting off with a wild mouse coaster. I thought this was a good idea because we could start making some money and have some really fun interaction with the coaster going in and out of the cliff face, and that's what I'm going to sort of base the design and the layout of this park on. I want lots of interaction with the cliff face, lots of rides going in and out of it, sort of coaster track everywhere, and then we're going to build a construction site around it basically is the idea. Also plonk down a top spin and a twister, the only flat rides we've got at the moment I believe, so I thought that should be enough to keep guests entertained for a while. I do get a little bit carried away with the building element of this and kind of forget about keeping the guests happy in the park, but because it's just such easy goals for this one I wasn't really too concerned, and I'll sort of rectify it later on, but we'll get to that in a bit. For the time being I'm just sort of playing about with the terrain a bit to make sure that everything is looking good there, using tree stumps to hide all the supports because I didn't want the support showing for this coaster, because we're going to build a custom support structure around everything, and a lot of this ends up actually getting covered up by the scenery that I do. So you're just seeing the, I think we're using minecarts in the end, and they're just sort of whizzing in and out of the of the structure basically. And once we've got everything in place, it looks kind of cool. So I started off building some scaffolding, and this is sort of the base layer, and there's several different layers to this build, but I thought it would be kind of fun to have a load of scaffolding pieces everywhere and a load of planks. You can also change the colour of the planks now, which is kind of fun. So that's how I started off, basically just placing those everywhere, and then we do sort of decide to build a couple of vertical structures. I think this is going to be, well, this is the challenge really of this map, building a little bit more vertically than we're normally used to. So using, you know, different pieces, I guess, to build upwards, rather than just building on sort of flat land or hilly terrain or anything like that. It's literally a cliff face. So yeah, it's a really interesting idea for a map, and actually having quite a lot of fun trying to build in a completely different style here. And to start with, I sort of thought that the path would just stay at the top and all the rides would go down, but then I decided I want a bit more guest interaction at the bottom, so later on we do place pathing so that they can access the beach area as well. But everything has changed quite a little bit by then, because I decided on a slightly different twist on the theme later on in the build. Now you can see I placed a structure in for the first crane, but I didn't really have the pieces that I wanted to use, and in the end when I do finish off this crane I still didn't have the pieces that I'd originally planned to use, but I just decided to do it a different way, so that's fine. But I just wanted to get a few things sort of in place to see how it would all look before really going into detail with anything. And then the next thing I think I'll work on is the actual coaster station for the Wild Mouse. So I had to work around the sort of entrance and exit queue line, which does look a little bit funny because of how high it's placed, but once the theming's all in place it should look fine. Like there you can see we're supporting it with scaffold pieces, and yeah, it all works out pretty fine. I decided at this point there wasn't enough scaffolding, so I added a little bit more into different areas, obviously checking the track for clearance and everything like that, making sure everything's believable enough, even though this isn't particularly realistic. I don't think I can picture any parks in real life where they build like this, but I kind of remember in Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 I used to build stuff like this all the time. One of my favourite campaign scenarios was Razor Rocks, which I think was in one of the expansion packs, and I used to just love putting different coaster track in and out of the rocks. I used to love the tunnels that we had, that, you know, that automatically spawned when you build track into a wall. I think they changed that in the second game and I didn't like it as much, but it's really nostalgic to me having just like a mismatch of track going into tunnels into like a rock face, because it just reminds me of all the cool stuff that I used to do in that game back in the day. So now I'm getting to the station, and this is just basically meant to sort of look like a construction yard type thing. So with the limited pieces that we've got at the moment, I'm just trying to build some stuff that looks like it could be kind of mechanical. Not really sure what any of it's supposed to be honest, but it's just stuff that kind of fits in with the look of the whole area. And I kind of like the cube barriers that we've got on the side as well, with the red and white, just to alert people of the danger, I guess. And we've made our own sort of custom don't die fence in there as well, which works pretty well because it is quite a large drop if you fall down there. So it's not something you really want to be doing. You can see now the stations have come together pretty quickly. There's nothing too special here, really, just using random different roof pieces, giving them different heights and stuff for variation, and just looks all a bit jumbled and random, which is kind of the look we're going for. And I've actually placed some scaffolding over the exit path to make it look like the guests are walking on the scaffolding, which I think is a kind of fun idea. It's funny, like, getting to this stage in the campaign playthrough, trying to still come up with original ideas, because obviously you can be a bit limited sometimes with the sort of grid element and the pieces that you've got in the game. So it's always fun to try and think of something that's a little bit different and just mix things up a bit, really. So now we're putting in a RMC monorail, or the single rail coaster, as I believe it's called in the game, or the monorail coaster, whatever. So the first element is a huge curved drop out of the cliff, and yeah, it's a really intense layout, this one. Just the elements that I use here and the way everything's really tightly packed together, and obviously the amount of speed it's going to get off that first drop just makes the whole thing really intense. There was actually a part where it wasn't completing the layout, so I had to add a booster section in, or a launch rather, into part of the track, which I found surprising, because with the high difference of that first drop, I thought it would easily make it around the track up until the end, where obviously we need either a launch or a lift hill. I think I went for a launch in the end to get the train back up to the station. But yeah, again, doing loads of tunnelling in and out of the cliff face, and just making it work around everything that we've already got in here. I thought it's probably a good idea to get the coasters in before going too wild with the theming, because we're not going to have, obviously the space to finish everything off. But yeah, I found it actually surprisingly easy to get this one back to the station. It ends up just having a huge launch underground into an upwards hill, and then into the brake run, which is kind of a fun ending for the ride as well. Like a lot of roller coasters, the first first half of the ride is the fun bit, but with this one you get that launch and shooting out of the hill at the end of the ride. I think it would be a really fun end to the ride, certainly more fun than just doing a boring lift hill at the end, which is something that you really want to avoid, to be honest. But yeah, that's pretty much the layout for the RMC in place, and now it gives me a chance to start building up a little bit more with the theming. So firstly, I just put this don't die barrier around the edge of the monorail coaster station. Obviously we need to do a lot more work on that at some point, but then I wanted to get the pathing in to bring guests down to the bottom section of the map, and yeah, just using slightly different pathing and giving it some different colours and textures. I wanted the pathing to be quite random in this map, not to all be the same, but all sort of similar concrete pieces, and it's like they've just stuck everything together just temporarily for the construction site. And then I continued building some of this same foundation type stuff, building up this layer all made from basic shapes, really straightforward, and then just sort of recolouring it to make it look a little bit more interesting. And then the really fun stuff starts to begin in just a sec, when we actually start building the vertical structures everywhere. Which, yeah, I started to become more happy with the build once this got put in place, because I knew where I was going with it by that point, if that makes sense. Sometimes it's difficult when you've got things bare bones and you're just starting off with a build, knowing what direction it's actually going to go in. But yeah, I feel this yellow scaffolding worked really well. Yeah, it's bold and bright and in your face, and probably a little bit cliched for a construction site, but it makes it very clear what the idea of this is supposed to be. So we do lots of this stuff, and it does hide some of the floating track of the wild mouse, but we also use some of the support pieces to put in some custom supports as well, which I think look kind of cool. And using lots of basic shapes as well. The structures I'm actually using there are just the ordinary sort of metal structure pieces in the walls set. I can't remember what they're called, to be honest, but they work perfectly for this idea. And then a lot of blueprinting and duplication to make everything a lot quicker, because doing all this by hand would be an absolute pain, and we haven't really got time for that. So yeah, just shoving loads of these structures together really, and there is a slight there's a couple of pieces that have a slight colour change to add variation there. It's very subtle, barely noticeable, but I think it's always worth doing that just to add a sort of another dimension really to the build. And I've also cut out some sections to make it look like this is sort of poorly made, I guess, or a bit rickety. I wanted to do a diagonal section here, but it didn't really work with the cube pieces on the grid size I had, so I ended up just scrapping that idea and just having a couple of different levels here. Again, variation always sort of adds interest to the build. So once all of this construction site was in place, I had another idea for some theming that was basically along the same lines, but having a slightly different take on it. So I wanted to do a junkyard style area, and I thought this area here with the various inversions and lots of interaction with the cliff face would be perfect to build a junkyard. So I basically just made a load of shipping containers. There's one there that's going to be held up by the crane, the diagonal one, which I think adds a bit of interest to it, just having a diagonal sort of element, making it look a little bit less gridded. But then other than that, we've just got lots of horizontal and a couple of vertical container, shipping container type things built into the wall face. Not sure how this would really work, but it's a fun idea and it looks kind of cool. And I tried to add a bit of detail to some of the containers, and I tried to keep with these sort of junkyard style colours, which I always think are fun, and the coaster track colour works perfectly with that theme as well. So I think this would be quite a cool composition. I do use some pillars and borders and stuff to add a bit of variation to some of the crates. Again, it's just trying to make everything look a little bit random so that it's not all the same. Everything's a bit of a jumble, just stuff shoved everywhere basically. And then we're using some support structures and scaffolding again to support all this. And then I had the kind of crazy idea that we could also put some cars into this junkyard and just sort of make it look like these are old car parts or whatever, or scrap cars that have been shoved into this wall of randomness. I was struggling really to find sort of suitable pieces at this point, but at the same time the research was on decorations, so loads of scenery pieces were getting researched. So I recoloured a water tower, which kind of fits into the theme, and shoved a load of these wheels in, these rotating wheels, which I really wanted to use in the last build, but couldn't find a good space for them, so I think I've just put them in because I wanted to use them, and they kind of fit the theme. Just going up there and sorting out some of the part where we've got issues for whatever reason. And then I put a few triggered effects in and some smoke everywhere and flames and stuff like that, all that good stuff that sort of adds to this junkyard feel, which I think this turned out really well actually. I think it worked out quite well, and I wanted to extend the path over to it so that guests could see all this from ground level rather than just when they're on the coaster. And I'm quite glad I did that because we've got another sort of area of the park now. And then putting in some black barrels, which worked out really well. Look like they're maybe oil barrels or something like that. And then this is what really tied everything in together well, I think. The tyre pieces, just placing tyres everywhere, it then just really resembled what it was supposed to be. And yeah, like I say, because we got more pieces researched while I was building this, it was really useful to implement them into the build. I realised that the theming at the top of the junkyard sort of tower thing needed a bit more work on it. So firstly I sorted out this crane here, which has been sitting here since the start of the build pretty much, and obviously had the crane holding up the shipping container, which, yeah, it's not perfect, but it works out well enough. I didn't want to add too much detail to the crane either. I thought it was sort of fine looking the way it is. And then I just added a few more things to the top, so some rock work to cover everything up, and a satellite dish which does rotate, so I had to be careful about the placement of that. But I feel like it's something else that you could see on a junkyard. It'd probably be static, to be honest. It probably wouldn't be working. But yeah, I did look at some concept art actually on Pinterest of a scrapyard, junkyard type thing, and all of these pieces I'm using appeared in that concept art, so yeah, I think it worked out quite well. And thinking about it, actually, the top spin would probably work quite well in that area as well, so I might move a few things around at the top and yeah, mix it up a little bit. But for now, this is sort of where we stopped the build. We've got the park to a fairly good place where we're making money and things are running alright. So what we'll do now is jump over into a real-time section and just take a look at the park in the state it's in currently. So this is how Sheer Cliffs is looking thus far. We've got our construction site area over here with lots going on, and our junkyard style area over here as well. Perfect timing there with a coaster going by. Yeah, all in all, I think the park's really getting there. I did, right at the end of that time lapse, just put together a rock formation at the bottom here for some shops, but I'm not happy with how that looks, so I'm going to find somewhere else to put shops and yeah, get rid of that basically. And I mean, the only trouble is the end section here of the path doesn't actually lead to anything, but we'll figure something out because I don't like the way that looks. But yeah, let's see how the game is, or how the park's doing gameplay wise. So 500 guests are required. We've got 325. No loan debts. We didn't actually take out a loan. Oh no, we have, but it doesn't matter anyway. The park's making a reasonable amount of money. I'm just currently researching thrill rides. We do now have a couple of flat rides that I put into the park. The motion simulator is hidden underground here. It was really just to get an extra ride in. I think one thing that might be fun if we can do it is to have an elevator maybe going up in this crane. I think we have that available in this game. I'm not sure, so I'm going to research transport rides just in case we do get that, in which case I think that would be really fun to place. But yeah, for the time being, I think, or for the next time lapse rather, I think I'm going to change these around. Probably have this up here, do a bit more junkyard stuff up the top here, and then yeah, look at theming up the rest of the park up here, maybe do a little bit more down here, and just see where we're at. And obviously work towards the goals. I'd like to be able to do it without putting another coaster in, really, because I don't think we really need one. But we only have 318 guests, so we might have to rethink that. Anyway, let's get back into the time lapse. I'll see you all over there. Welcome back to the time lapse. The first thing that I work on is a flat ride. So we've got this drop tower, and it just manages to squeeze in to the corner of the park here, and I obviously removed the shops and stalls that were in that place because I didn't like the way it looked with the rock work there, and instead we've just got a queue line with a few small props. And I think that ties in a lot better with the area, so I'm fairly happy with how that works. It also gives guests a reason to go over into that corner of the park to ride, obviously, the drop tower. I moved some shops and stalls over to sort of the middle section here and just covered them over with a very, very basic building. This is like the sort of temporary buildings that get put down on construction sites. I'm not sure what you'd call them really, like sort of mobile type buildings I suppose, but the great thing is they're obviously really easy to make because there's hardly any detail on them, but to make them look a little bit less boring I put some HVAC sort of stuff on the roof, which I'm not sure if that'd really be realistic anyway for a temporary building that's put down on the site like that, but it's fine. Yeah, it just I couldn't leave it looking too plain because it then kind of looks like I put no effort into it whatsoever. So what I'm really doing now then is just polishing off this bottom section of the park with put some canopies in there for a little seating area for the guests, just using very basic things. Everything's sort of meant to look like it can be easily dismantled and moved away. That's the idea of this theme. Obviously nothing too permanent I suppose, and starting to get a good selection of rides in the park as well now. It's amazing what I've managed to actually fit into this park so far. You can see now I'm doing a bit of lighting, so I wanted the main structure to light up yellow, so just putting some spotlights down and facing them at the construction itself. All pretty straightforward stuff, and then just a few finishing touches really, messing about a bit more with the ground textures and getting everything to look a bit more cohesive. And yeah, it looks like I did some zoning for the staff as well. This turned out to be quite tricky because obviously we've got the two levels, so I think some members of staff were getting stuck in the stairway that sort of leads from the top to the bottom of the park, which was a bit of an issue, but in the end I think I just had a few staff members that were free to roam around the whole park, and that seemed to solve that issue. It's not always that I notice issues with gameplay in the park because I get so sort of carried away with theming, and yeah, I miss out sometimes on things that are happening, and then I realise that guests are really unhappy and I have to sort something out, so I start losing money. At this point I'd researched the adventure pieces, so I decided to use the adventure border, which I sort of prefer the texture of for this build. I was kind of waiting for that to be researched, and that's just to top off the big yellow construction, and I think that works out pretty well. It adds a tiny little bit more detail to the top of that structure, and then I add another shipping container to the second crane that we've got in the park, I did feel like it was time I made an effort naming the coasters, so I even gave this one a sign. We go with the name High Voltage for the Wild Mouse and Toxic Twister for the monorail coaster. I also researched the elevator, which I was really pleased about, because it works perfectly with this theme, and I placed it down, but I thought that there was just a little bit too many structures in this area now, and it was looking a little bit too busy, so I end up covering up the top and bottom section of the elevator, the part where the guests get in and out of. I don't really know what the name for that part of an elevator is either. The door, I guess. But yeah, swiftly moving on, we're building our third and final coaster. I didn't really want to do this because I didn't feel like I had enough room for a good layout, but I thought I'd give it a try because we needed another 100 or so guests, and I probably wasn't going to do that with flat rides, and with the way that the map is sort of laid out, it's kind of worked out easier to actually put a coaster in here than too many more flat rides. So I went for the Gerslau, which seems to fit everywhere. Well, sorry, it's you can make a compact layout with it, is what I mean by that. So yeah, actually, this is probably my favourite layout of all the coasters in the park. Once it's finished, obviously, again, it starts at the top and drops down to the bottom section of the park. And then at the end there is a lift hill. Unfortunately, I couldn't do a launch back into the station for this one because we didn't have that element available. And then I've just got a very, very tight space to work with to get the coaster back to the station, but it works out pretty well. And I think there's some good fun elements and some good tunnels and stuff which we will theme up a bit later on. So yeah, with once this coaster was open, the park pretty much was, well, I met the goals basically once this was up and running, which you'll see in just a moment. So sorting out some of the path work and changing the colour of the track, and then removing all the pathwork supports, because obviously we're going to do our own thing there. And again, I think this is always something that is worth doing. Really easy as well with the tree stumps to do that. Another sort of challenge here was finding a place for the exit queue line, because there's an awful lot of track and there's a really, really tight space to work with. So I'm kind of quite pleased that I managed to actually find a way through there. Now you can see the confetti dropping to signify that we have completed the scenario, so I could kind of relax now. Just needed that third coaster as well to start bringing enough money really to meet the goals. I did take out a loan actually to build that coaster because I haven't really been that good with sort of keeping an eye on the cash flow in this one. But anyway, putting in some more of the support structures that we've got around the Wild Mouse. I thought that some areas of the cliff looked a bit bare and I wanted it to all sort of be cohesive, so that's what I do there, and then covering up the top and bottom of the lift with a nice basic building. And I think that looks a lot better, but I still wanted the doors to be visible so you could see guests getting in and out of the lift, because I think that's kind of fun to watch. But yeah, I mean, it does look very busy in this area now, but I think that's kind of the idea of this theme anyway. The fact that it's a construction site, there's loads going on, lots of kinetic energy, and at this point I decided it's time to sort out all the restaurants and shops and everything like that at the top of the map. So I decided we're going to stick with some basic buildings, but maybe these ones are a little bit more permanent perhaps, or they're not sort of necessarily all mobile buildings. I basically just wanted a bit of variety in the building style, so I went for this sort of concrete texture, which is a really cool texture that I don't use enough really in the game. But yeah, just very basic buildings with using some windows at the top. I don't really know why, other than just aesthetic, to be honest. It doesn't really make that much sense. But yeah, these basic buildings sort of bring everything together in this area and fit the theme really well, I think. This is not a map where we're building pretty buildings, which did turn out to be a slight bit of an issue because the entrance is a pretty building and we don't want that, so I end up shoving a load of scaffolding around it, which you'll see in just a moment. First of all, finishing off or polishing off some of these buildings. So we've got toilet block, and then we've got some more buildings over by the twister. I really just wanted to sort of carry on with the same theme. It's difficult, we're kind of limited for pieces building in this style, so everything does look kind of similar, but I think it all works fairly well together. Doing the same again there with the staff building, and then I start putting some fencing around the edge of the park. This is obviously meant to look like construction site type fencing, so very plain and basic. And I decide to use the lorry as a theming piece just because I can. It kind of works with this theme. Very, very, very boring prop to put in a theme park, but yeah, it works for the theme, so we went with it. Putting a few smaller props in then, like the road cones and the crates, and recolouring them, but I then decided that I want to do a custom JCB or digger type thing, and I thought I'm never normally that good at doing these things, but I think this one actually came together pretty well. I thought the best thing to use for the wheels would be the gear pieces. I tried to control them with a trigger thingy, but there's just to make them stop moving, but there's no way to do that, so we're just gonna sort of have the belief that these JCBs are moving very slowly, and yeah, it's a bit, the gears just look too good as tyres to not use them, so we're just going to have to settle for the fact that they're moving even though the whole thing is standing still. Using some chocolate pieces in, as you do for the chassis of the digger, and one of those sci-fi props that I used loads in my last build actually, for the sort of, for the part where the engine goes, I don't know what part, the main sort of bodywork I guess, and the burial mounds for the roof piece, and then obviously using some coffins for the interior, and just to hide some of the chocolate pieces, and then some adventure details actually worked quite well for the sort of crane and thing on the front. I can't think what that's called now, but you know, the thing that scrapes up all the stuff. And yeah, for Parkitect, I think it works out pretty well, for vanilla anyway, so I copied it across 3 or 4 times and thought, yeah, we'll have these everywhere. And then I thought we can actually colour the ground in mud and make it look like they're working in a big dirt section. So I did think it'd also be cool to have some sort of mounds of dirt that they're shoveling around, so just using bushes for those, colouring them brown, that works out perfectly. And yeah, that's pretty much that complete. So now I'm working on the scaffolding for the entrance area, or the entrance building rather, and just using the same stuff that I've used before, and I think it works well enough to just sort of make believe that maybe this part of whatever they're building here is complete, this building's complete, and then the rest of the park is the construction's going on around it. I don't know. Moving on then to theming up the final coaster, and it's getting tricky at this point to think how to do this theme but in a different way, to add variety. I didn't want to just carry on doing the same thing, so I just used some slightly different pieces, but to build a similar kind of structure. And I thought this is quite a large area to actually cover up with theming, so I want something that can be put together pretty quickly. So I don't go for anything too crazy with it. Just using borders and pillars, a few see-through windows, and the support pieces for the scaffolding. And I cut out quite a lot of the build here. You'll just see that most of it is now complete because it's basically the same thing over and over again. So it's really not that fun to watch, and there's not an awful lot I could say about it. Obviously making sure that the coaster isn't clipping through any parts of the scaffolding, but having a couple of elements where it interacts with the track as well. So there's a couple of near miss elements and stuff like that, which I think is fun. But yeah, all in all, I think this slightly varied version of this scaffolding works out pretty well. And at the top you can see I put in the barriers, the don't die barriers again, because I think they're kind of fun. And yeah, we just use pretty basic standard fencing other than that to put everywhere. The coaster station is very, very basic. It's just a rectangle box with a couple of bits on the top, and then just mixing up scaffolding and normal roofing. So the whole roof is covered up, but it still looks like it's sort of in maintenance, fits the theme kind of thing. But yeah, I just wanted something that could go together nice and quickly, that sort of still looks fairly reasonable, I guess. Just finishing off some of the barrier here, and then putting in the fencing, which, like I say, is the sort of plain and ordinary fencing. And then we're just doing a final few finishing touches here, really. So a few more little props, road cones and whatnot. I do end up calling this coaster Excavation, which I think is quite a fitting name. That's it anyway for the time lapse, so I'll see you all over in the final park tour. Here we are in Sheer Cliffs, the completed park. You can see it's actually quite a large park when you fill up this whole area that you've got to work with. Obviously we could have done more down here, but that sort of wasn't really the theme we're going for. So yeah, we're just stuck to this area on the cliff, and I'm really happy that I managed to utilise the sort of cliff side as much as possible to build on. But let's take a closer look at what we've got in the final product. So as you come into the park, straight away you're greeted by these JCBs working on this little bit of building site here. And then we've got our first rides for the park. So there's a twister over here, and the top spin over here overlooking the cliffside. And we'll get back to that area in a bit. Ooh, we've gone all the way over there. So here is our first coaster, High Voltage. You can see it, this is as the guests would see it going in. I find it easier to look at from this angle. This whole park really looks best from this angle, to be honest. So let's have a look at the stats for High Voltage. Very high excitement, medium intensity, and let's take a ride on it. There's not really that much to say about the layout for this one. Obviously it's got some typical Wild Mouse layouts, but Wild Mouse elements, but it's pretty much a custom layout to make use of the terrain around it with a cliff face and everything. But I think there's really, really fun near miss elements on this one, and lots of good interaction with everything else around it. And unfortunately it does stop here on this final brake run, or this final block break, but I'm fine with that because after that it is just the lift hill back into the station. So I don't think that's too much of a problem really that it does that, and it means that we can have, you know, a good amount of trains on the circuit. So what way should we go next? Should we have a look at, obviously over here we've got our first crane and our elevator, but I don't think we'll go down there yet. I think we'll take a look at the Toxic Twister coaster, the RMC monorail or single rail coaster. This actually does have an extreme intensity over 100.6, but guests are still riding it, so I'm not going to let that bother me too much. And I think we're going to have to wait for this train to go all the way around, unfortunately. So we'll speed things up a bit. Wait for it to load up. And we're off, so out of the station, a very tight curve into a curved first drop. And then it's just a ton of inversions, all very intense, all very compact, and in and out of this big construction site building. And then we come to our Junkyard area with some more inversions, and I think the way these inversions work over this area is really fun, and a cheeky triggered effect there with the flame effect as well. And then at the end of the coaster you get a really fun launch lift hill out to take you back to the top and round and back to the brake run. So yeah, very, very different layout to anything I've done before. But it makes for a really fun ride. And the good thing is as well, even though it's only sort of single file riders, because of the launch lift hill at the end, it means that the operations are really good on this as well. So I think before we look at the Gerstlauer coaster, we'll go down to the bottom and have a look at some of the theming down there. So I can't even see where the entrance for the steps are, but we'll just pretend we're going down in the elevator. And when we come out of the bottom, we've got this double Ferris wheel, and there's more construction site stuff everywhere. A couple more JCBs down here. And here is our main restaurant building for this area, and here is our junkyard. So you can have a little bit a look at this in a little bit more detail. But I think some of the colours used here and some of the pieces work really well together to give that just chaotic sort of look to it. And obviously we've got our Skyfall drop tower over here as well. So let's go up and ride the final coaster, which is Excavation, the Gerstlauer Infinity coaster, I guess, or Eurofighter or something like that. 94 Extreme Excitement, really proud of that. Really medium intensity on this one, and we might as well get straight in now. So first drop into an inversion, into some helixes and tunnels, and then down into another inversion. I can't think what these are called, so sort of a half loop and a corkscrew. We've got two of them. In fact, looking at it, I guess we've only got the two inversions on this coaster, but it definitely still packs a punch, this one, and the nice compact layout works out really well just for finishing off this park as well. So yeah, that is pretty much it for the build. I'm just going to zoom out and quickly show you what the park looks like at night. So yeah, a little bit of sort of mood lighting on this construction down here, but for most of the path it's just your standard white lighting, which I think works absolutely fine for this sort of theme. Go back into daytime for one final look at the park. Yeah, pretty pleased with how this all came together. And that means Sheer Cliffs is now complete, so we can save and go back to the map. Right, so Sheer Cliffs complete. Still need to go back and get the gold coins for these three. I'm a bit of a completionist, so I will need to do that at some point. But that means that we now have one final map left on the main scenarios of the original game, so that is Salgonia. I've heard this is a really difficult one to complete, and I want to try and do something quite special as it's the last map, so probably have a little bit of a break before I get started on this one, but that will be the next and final episode. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.